On April 7, 2026, U.S. President Donald Trump issued a strong warning to Iran, setting a deadline related to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical oil shipping routes. In a post on his social media platform, Trump suggested that if Iran failed to comply, there could be severe consequences. The statement quickly captured global attention. Governments, analysts, and military observers began closely monitoring the situation. As the deadline approached, tensions escalated rapidly. Some experts warned that the situation could spiral into a broader military conflict. Speculation even grew around the possibility of extreme escalation, although no official confirmation supported such claims. At that moment, the world seemed to be standing on the edge of a major crisis. But then, in a surprising turn of events, just 90 minutes before the deadline expired, both the United States and Iran agreed to a temporary 2-week ceasefire. The sudden pause brought short-term relief, but it did not resolve the underlying conflict. Soon after, negotiations between the two sides reportedly failed. In response, the United States moved forward with increased pressure, including a naval blockade targeting Iranian ports. Then came another unexpected twist. On April 17th, Iran announced that the Strait of Hormuz was open for commercial shipping. This decision signaled a possible de-escalation and raised hopes for stability in global energy markets. However, the optimism did not last long. Within a day, Iran reversed its position and declared the strait closed again. Reports also indicated that cargo vessels passing through the region were targeted, raising fresh concerns about maritime security and the risk of further escalation. This series of rapid developments has left the international community uncertain about what comes next. Is this a controlled geopolitical strategy, or a situation that could escalate beyond anyone's expectations? One thing is clear: the situation remains highly volatile. Hey everyone, the world is changing faster than ever. One day there are fears of a major war, the next day a ceasefire, and then a blockade.
Since the conflict began on February 28th, the human cost has continued to rise. In just over 50 days, more than 4,000 people have reportedly been killed. Over 2,000 of those deaths were in Iran, and more than 2,100 in Lebanon. In addition, at least 26 Israeli and 13 American soldiers have been confirmed dead. At first glance, these numbers may seem like statistics, but behind each number is a human story. Families affected, communities disrupted, and lives permanently changed. The conflict has also forced millions of people to leave their homes, creating a growing humanitarian crisis across the region. And this raises a difficult question: what has been gained from this escalation? One of the most serious turning points came when military operations reportedly targeted Iran's nuclear infrastructure. On March 21st, the Natanz nuclear facility was struck, an important site linked to Iran's nuclear program. However, concerns intensified even further around the Bushehr nuclear power plant, Iran's only operational nuclear power facility. Due to its location near the coast and the presence of nuclear material, any direct strike on this site could carry significant environmental risks. Reports suggest that several strikes occurred in areas surrounding the facility. While the plant itself was not confirmed to be directly hit, experts warned about the potential consequences if it had been. A direct impact could have led to radioactive contamination, affecting water systems and marine life across parts of the Gulf region. Analysts often compare such risks to past nuclear incidents, though the scale and circumstances would differ significantly. Regional leaders have also expressed concern. In earlier statements, officials warned that damage to coastal nuclear infrastructure could have far-reaching environmental and economic consequences. The key issue is not just military escalation, but the long-term risks associated with it. Because in modern warfare, the impact is no longer limited to borders. It can extend to ecosystems, economies, and future generations. And that is what makes the situation especially dangerous and unpredictable.
It would be basically entirely contaminated. No water, no fish, nothing. The next major turning point in this escalating crisis came on April 3, and it challenged several earlier claims about the situation on the ground. U.S. President Donald Trump had repeatedly stated that American forces had achieved total air dominance over Iran. According to those claims, Iran's military capabilities had been significantly weakened, and the conflict was nearing its end. However, on April 3rd, Iran reportedly shot down an F-15E Strike Eagle fighter jet. 2 crew members were on board, a pilot and a weapons systems officer. Both ejected over Iranian territory. The pilot was rescued within a few hours, but the second crew member was missing. This quickly turned into a high-stakes race. If Iranian forces had reached him first, they could have captured a U.S. military officer, an outcome that could have had serious strategic and political consequences. The missing airman was alone behind enemy lines for more than 24 hours. Despite being injured during ejection, he reportedly moved to higher ground, reaching an altitude of around 7,000 feet, and took shelter in a narrow mountain crevice. This aligns with standard survival protocols, where personnel are trained to seek elevated and concealed positions in hostile territory. From that location, he transmitted a short radio message consisting of just 3 words: "God is good." At first, U.S. officials suspected the message might have been a deception, possibly sent by Iranian forces to lure a rescue operation into an ambush. But after further verification and analysis, the message was confirmed to be authentic. What followed next would become one of the most critical moments in this unfolding conflict.
Then, a rescue operation began, one that quickly became one of the most complex missions of the conflict. First, U.S. intelligence agencies reportedly launched a deception campaign. False information was circulated suggesting that both crew members had already been rescued with the aim of reducing Iranian search efforts. After that, the exact location of the missing airman was identified and shared with military units. What followed was a large-scale rescue effort. Elite units, including Special Operations Forces, were deployed. Air support was used to secure the area and delay any opposing forces from reaching the airman first. In the end, the mission was successful. The airman was rescued. On April 5th, President Donald Trump posted, "We got him," presenting the operation as a demonstration of American military capability. However, the broader situation was more complex. Despite the successful rescue, Iran had managed to shoot down an American fighter jet. During the operation, rescue aircraft also came under fire. Reports indicated that multiple aircraft were damaged and some were destroyed on the ground to prevent them from being captured. By that point, the pressure from Washington had been building for weeks. President Trump had issued multiple deadlines for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz on March 21st, March 23rd, March 28th, and finally April 6th. Iran did not comply with any of them. As the deadlines passed without results, the rhetoric became increasingly aggressive. In public statements and social media posts, Trump warned of severe consequences, including potential strikes on infrastructure such as power plants and bridges. Despite these warnings, Iran's position remained unchanged. Then came one of the most controversial moments of the entire crisis. In a post that drew global attention, Trump suggested that the situation could lead to the destruction of an entire civilization. He also used highly inflammatory language when referring to Iran, remarks that were widely criticized by international observers. These statements raised serious concerns about the direction of the conflict and the risk of further escalation.
He dehumanized the entire country, referring to Iranians as animals. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, warned that such language could be interpreted as dangerous and inflammatory. Legal experts also pointed out that intentionally targeting civilian infrastructure would violate international law and could be considered a war crime. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres cautioned that attacks on civilian infrastructure are prohibited under international law. As tensions escalated, several countries in the Middle East issued advisories urging their citizens to move to safer locations. The situation appeared to be approaching a critical breaking point. Shortly before the deadline, the United States reportedly carried out a strike on Karg Island, a key hub for Iran's oil exports. But then, in a completely unexpected development, with just 90 minutes remaining before the deadline, both the United States and Iran announced a 2-week ceasefire. One of the most surprising elements was the reported role of Pakistan as a mediator. According to reports, communication channels between Pakistan's military leadership and the U.S. had been active, which helped facilitate the agreement. Under the terms of the ceasefire, Iran was expected to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, while the United States would pause further military strikes for 2 weeks. A follow-up round of talks aimed at a longer-term agreement was scheduled for April 10 in Pakistan. However, the situation quickly became more complicated. Within hours of the announcement, on April 8th, Israel launched a series of strikes in Lebanon, resulting in significant casualties. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that Lebanon was not included in the ceasefire arrangement between the United States and Iran, and therefore military operations would continue. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance also indicated that the ceasefire did not formally extend to Lebanon. However, statements from Pakistan suggested a broader interpretation of the agreement, implying that regional de-escalation was expected. This created confusion and raised questions about the scope and credibility of the ceasefire. In response, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi emphasized that a clear and consistent approach was necessary, either a commitment to de-escalation or continued conflict. Amid this uncertainty, diplomatic efforts continued. On April 11th, U.S.-Iran talks began in Islamabad, marking another attempt to resolve the crisis through negotiation. The discussions reportedly lasted for 21 hours.
Iran proposed a 10-point peace plan. It demanded the removal of all sanctions, recognition of its control over the Strait of Hormuz, and the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the Middle East. Most importantly, Iran insisted on its right to uranium enrichment. According to President Trump, several points were close to agreement. However, the most critical issue, nuclear activity, remained unresolved. On the morning of April 12, the U.S. delegation, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, announced that no agreement had been reached. Reports indicated that the U.S. wanted Iran to suspend nuclear activity for 20 years, while Iran was only willing to agree to a 5-year suspension. Following the failure of the talks, Trump announced a full naval blockade of Iranian ports. This led to a dual blockade situation in the Strait of Hormuz. While Iran's earlier restrictions did not significantly affect oil flow to countries like China, the U.S. blockade aimed to limit broader access, including Chinese shipments. China warned the United States against interfering in its relationship with Iran. As the blockade began, around 13 ships were reportedly stopped or redirected. Then, on April 17th, Iran suddenly announced that the Strait of Hormuz was fully open, stating that there would be no blockade as long as the ceasefire remained in place. This announcement caused global oil prices to drop by around 10%. However, within a day, Iran reversed its position and declared the strait closed again. Trump responded by stating that the U.S. blockade would continue until a formal agreement was reached. This conflict has also had wider global consequences. Several Indian-flagged vessels were affected while attempting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Reports indicated that ships were intercepted and forced to turn back amid rising tensions. This situation raised broader concerns about energy security and the vulnerability of global trade routes during geopolitical conflicts. Diplomatic responses followed, with governments expressing concern and seeking clarification over maritime safety and access.
Meanwhile, there were some signs of temporary de-escalation in other parts of the region. A 10-day ceasefire was announced between Israel and Lebanon, reportedly facilitated through U.S. mediation. It was stated that further negotiations could follow to establish a more permanent peace, although military presence in certain areas would continue. At the same time, uncertainty remained around the broader Iran-U.S. ceasefire. As the 2-week agreement approached its end on April 22nd, a key question emerged. Would a long-term deal be reached, or would tensions rise again? Another critical question was whether all regional actors would accept such an agreement. Throughout the conflict, actions on the ground repeatedly shifted the direction of events, making long-term stability difficult to achieve. The situation highlights how modern conflicts are no longer isolated. Decisions made by one country can quickly impact the entire region and even the global economy. As negotiations continue and tensions fluctuate, the future remains uncertain. Will diplomacy prevail, or will the conflict escalate once again? That remains to be seen. Thank you for watching. If you found this informative, consider subscribing for more in-depth analysis.